Okay, so I'm going to get started here. So my name is Flora Giesbrecht, and I am the Watershed Coordinator for a nonprofit organization called the Elbow River Watershed Partnership, also called the ERWP. We are a watershed stewardship group, and we're very similar to the Friends of Fish Creek, our neighboring watershed. We offer some similar programs. We were established in 2004 in Calgary, and I'm currently working out of my parents' place in Canmore. So today I'm going to talk about social media, the Elbow River, the ERWP, and you. And we're very happy to be a part of the Friends of Fish Creek's Creek Fest Reimagined. I think we're the first presentation of the series, so that's a pretty exciting position to be. All right, so we'll move through the presentation. Here's a little outline of what we'll cover. So in the next half an hour, we're going to talk about a few facts about the Elbow River Watershed. We'll talk about what the Elbow River Watershed Partnership does, and we'll try and sort out if you live, work, or play in the Elbow Watershed. And if you do, you might be interested in our latest social media campaign, which we call #FrameOfMind. And there's a whole bunch of other hashtags associated that we'll talk about later. So some questions you might have are, what and where is the Elbow Watershed? Where is the Elbow River? What does the Elbow Watershed look like? And do I live, work, or play in the Elbow Watershed? So to start, to get some perspective, we're going to look here at a map of Canada. So this map of Canada is representing some jurisdictional boundaries. It's showing the nation's border, and then it's also showing provincial boundaries. So if you can see my cursor, I'm focusing on the province of Alberta and Calgary for perspective. So each of these colored areas represents a different province. So what if we were to look at a map of Canada, but look at it in a different way with different boundaries? I'm going to go to the next map here, and then this map is showing something different. There's still some colored areas, but you can probably tell it looks a lot different than the other map of Canada that we're just looking at. So I'm going to flash back for a second. There's the map of Canada with the provinces. And here's the one, map of Canada broken down into major drainage basins, also called watersheds. So this map has a lot of detail and a lot of information. For our purposes, we're not going to worry about all of that text. What we're going to focus on is this yellow area here. This yellow area is called the Nelson River Drainage Basin, or the Nelson Watershed. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this area. So here's another map showing the Nelson Watershed. And you can, this area outlined in yellow is a simplified version of the other map that you were just looking at. So you can see the boundaries of the province here. There's Alberta, here's Calgary for perspective, and there's the edge of Hudson Bay. So we're going to zoom in a little bit further, look a little closer. So here's a new map. This map also shows the very edge of the Hudson's Bay. You can see the Nelson River. You can see some of the province borders. So here's the edge of the province of Alberta. Here's Calgary, but this is focusing on a smaller drainage, a smaller watershed called the Saskatchewan River Basin. So here's Calgary for perspective. But we still can't see the Elbow River watershed. So we're going to break this watershed down a little bit smaller. So here is the Saskatchewan River Basin, again, broken down into smaller basins. And the area I'd like you to focus on now is a kind of cream colored area on my screen. This is the Bow Basin. So here's Calgary for perspective. Here's the US-Canada border. This is the provincial boundary of Alberta. So we're focusing now on this area. So we're going to break this down and zoom in on this watershed or drainage basin. There's the Bow Basin. So you can see what it looks like compared to the province of Alberta. Here's Calgary. We're going to have another map that's going to look at the Bow watershed or the Bow drainage basin that's broken up. And let's see if we can see the Elbow watershed now. So this gray area is representing the Bow Basin. And if you focus on this area here, this kind of funny shape that my cursor is moving around, that is the Elbow River watershed. And what you might notice is just to the south of us, our neighbors here, there's Fish Creek. Here's the Ghost, Jumping Pound. Some of you might live in Calgary and have been to Nose Hill. The Nose Creek drainage would be in that area. So underneath here is Calgary. But what we're going to focus on is the Elbow watershed, this area here. So we're going to break this map down again further. If we focus on this area that my cursor is going around, this is called the Upper Bow Basin. So here's a new map showing the outline of the Upper Bow Basin. And this map looks a little bit different because you can see some colors and texture. So for example, this white and black lines here, those are the Rocky Mountains. So the east edge of the Rocky Mountains, also a part of the Elbow River watershed's headwaters. This is the area of the Upper Bow River Basin, 15,500 square kilometers. And then the area of the Elbow River Basin is 1,235 square kilometers. So thinking back to the first map that we looked at, the one showing the yellow area of the Nelson, or I guess it was the second map, the one map of Canada showing the yellow Nelson River drainage and seeing how big that was. And then we zoomed in, and then we see the Elbow watershed. So how big do you think the Nelson drainage or Nelson watershed is? If you guessed somewhere around 1 million square kilometers, you are either a really good guesser or you're really quick on Google search. So to recap, we've got the Nelson Basin, the large yellow area that we're looking at. And then we looked at a map showing the Saskatchewan Basin, got a little bit smaller. And then we looked at a map showing the South Saskatchewan Basin. And then we looked at the Bow Basin. And then we looked at the Upper Bow Basin. And now we're looking at the Elbow River Basin. So some of you might be wondering, okay, what is a basin? What is a watershed? So if you take your hands and put them in front of you and cup them together so that your pinkies are touching, and cup your hands, and then imagine someone that you're with is pouring some water into your hands. So the water drops might land on your fingers, and then they're going to run down to the lowest point in your hands, which might be that crack between your pinkies. So this area of your hands represents a watershed. If that person was to pour some water and they missed your hands and they went outside of your hands, then that water is still following. It's still hitting on the landscape, but it's in a different watershed. So depending on what scale or how big you're looking, depends on what size of watershed you're looking at. So our focus today is on the Elbow River watershed. Here's another map of the Elbow River watershed in relation to the province of Alberta. So this is showing the province of Alberta, the outline. That little red area is the Elbow watershed, and these are some of the other boundaries within the province, but we'll focus on the Elbow watershed. So this map on the right here, it's another satellite image, and then it's showing the Elbow watershed broken up into smaller jurisdictions. So on that first map we were looking at on the Nelson drainage basin, if we had gone to the very first map, we would see the provinces, but this watershed is too small and it's central to see the areas of the province. So what we're looking at is a nation and municipalities. So this top part of the upper Elbow watershed is represented by this green area, and that is called Kananaskis Country or Kananaskis Improvement District. So this area is public lands. So that means this land is owned by you and I as Albertans and then managed by the government of Alberta. So if we start in the headwaters in the mountains and then virtually run down the Elbow River, the next jurisdiction that we will enter is a part of Rocky View County. So Rocky View County is a municipality. And if you've ever been to Bragg Creek, that's around this area. So Bragg Creek is a part of Rocky View County. If you've ever been to Callaway Park in Springbank area, this is part of Rocky View County. So now Rocky View County isn't just this area, but again, we're just focusing on the Elbow watershed. So this part of Rocky View County is what is in the Elbow watershed. Now, if you go down a little bit further, you hit Tsuut'ina Nation. And so Tsuut'ina Nation, again, is bigger than what we see, but we're focusing on the Elbow watershed. So this area here, if you've been to Redwood Meadows or you live in Redwood Meadows, then you live on Tsuut'ina Nation land and you also live in the Elbow River watershed. Moving downstream a little further, we're getting close to the end of the Elbow River before it enters the Bow River. So this blue area here is the Glenmore Reservoir, and that is where a lot of Calgary's drinking water ends up in this reservoir. So this red area here is Calgary. So if we were to break these areas down by percentages, over half, so 61% of the Elbow watershed is public lands, Kananaskis Country, 20% Rocky View County, 14% Tsuut'ina Nation, and 5% Calgary. So here's some quick facts about the Elbow River watershed and the Elbow River. The Elbow River has highly variable flows. That means that the water that is flowing in the river can change depending on a few factors. One of them is season. For example, if you were to look at the Elbow River flowing in the wintertime, it would have a lot less water in the river than in the summer or the spring. And one of the reasons for that is all of the water that falls in the watershed in the winter ends up as snow or ice. And so that water is held up and not in the river until spring when it melts. So the flows of the Elbow River are highly variable depending on season and also depending on year and the climate of that year. The Elbow River is relatively steep. So from Elbow Lake in the headwaters in Kananaskis Country, the river drops 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer before it enters the Bow River. The Elbow River is prone to flood and drought. The climate around the Elbow River is semi-arid and we are prone to drought. And then if anyone was around in 2013, you might have an idea on what the Elbow River looks like when it's flooding. For example, there were some popular videos going around showing a roof of a house floating down the Elbow River near Bragg Creek. The drainage basin, or the watershed area of the Elbow River watershed, is 1,235 square kilometers. Now that you've seen those maps that we looked at earlier, you have an idea on how big or how small that area is. The river is only 120 kilometers long. So if you're from Calgary and you've been to Canmore before, the river is shorter distance than that drive. The Elbow River has a large, wide alluvial aquifer, and groundwater is connected. So a lot of the river that you see that's flowing on the surface, there is even larger amount of river, depending on the season, that is flowing underground. And that area of unconsolidated material where the water is directly connected to the river, we call the alluvial aquifer. Although the Elbow watershed is a relatively small basin, being over 1,200 square kilometers, it has a variety of land uses, a variety of land types, and a variety of stakeholders and people that live, work, and play on the landscape. 1 in 6 Albertans drink from the Elbow. So what does our organization do? The Elbow River Watershed Partnership, also called the ERWP. Because there is so much varied terrain and stakeholders, our projects are also varied. So one of the projects that we do is restoration projects, where we plant willows along the stream banks or riparian areas in the Elbow watershed. Friends of Fish Creek do similar projects like this in the Fish Creek watershed, and we focus on the Elbow watershed. We have a freshwater field school for grade 8s, 9, and bio 20 students. We've had thousands of students over the past 15 years. They've had the opportunity to go along the Elbow River and look at the water quality, look at the land around them, and try and determine what the reason is that the water quality deteriorates as you progress downstream. We have a group of active citizen scientists who collect water quality on Bragg Creek. Bragg Creek is one of the smaller creeks that flows into the Elbow River. They've been doing that for 16 years. We have a variety of educational outreach via social media, meetings, and presentations. And this just so happens to be my first online presentation. So lucky you. One of the things that we're working on currently and spending a lot of time on is we're writing a state of the watershed report. So we're looking at the current conditions of the Elbow watershed, trying to ascertain how healthy it is, and we're creating a report so we can share our findings. And then we're also creating a story map, which, as you might have guessed, has a lot of maps. On to the next slide. So this is a little bit of a mini virtual tour of the Elbow watershed. So we're looking at a few different things on this map than the other maps. You can start to see a few of the roads, some of the major roads, and some of the municipalities. So we're going to start up here in the headwaters. Some of you might have been to Elbow Lake. Elbow Lake is right next to Mount Ray. Mount Ray has a glacier that starts to feed Elbow Lake. That is the highest point in the Elbow watershed. Some of you might have been to Elbow Lake to camp or fish. You would have accessed it either by driving down Highway 40 and then hiking about 1.5 kilometers, a very steep hill to this beautiful lake. Or you might have gone a longer journey and started from the Forget-Me-Not Pond area. So moving downstream, some of you may have been to Elbow Falls. So you guessed it, the Elbow River is a part of Elbow Falls. It forms Elbow Falls. Moving downstream, maybe some of you have been to McLean Creek area. So McLean Creek has camping and it has an extensive trail network for off-highway vehicles. So maybe you've been there. The next part of our tour, we're going to Bragg Creek. Some of you might have been to Bragg Creek and bought an ice cream or gone shopping. If you were in the town of Bragg Creek, chances are you were actually standing on top of the Elbow River. Remember when we were talking about the alluvial aquifer and the groundwater? So if I zoom back, take these photos away for a second, this blue area here, it looks perspectively, it looks pretty wide compared to how big the river is. So this area is representing the alluvial aquifer. And for example, in this area, which is the intersection of Highway 22 and Highway 8, this alluvial aquifer is almost 2 kilometers wide. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the alluvial aquifer and the groundwater and how the river is directly connected. So it's a little bit bigger than what you see. We're moving downstream a little bit further. We've passed through Springbank area. And now some of you might have been to Glenmore Park or Heritage Park or some other areas around the Glenmore Reservoir. So Glenmore Reservoir holds between 40 and 60% of Calgary's drinking water. Depending on what area of the city that you live in, you may have 100% Glenmore Reservoir, or you might have 100% water from the Bears Paw Dam on the Bow River, or you might have a combination. It just depends on where you live in the city and where your pipes come from. Okay, so the last little spot that we have on our virtual tour for this map is Fort Calgary. So the mouth of the Elbow River enters the Bow River right next to Fort Calgary. So some of you might have been there or live near there. So knowing all this, do you think you live, work, or play in the Elbow watershed? If so, this might be of interest to you. We have a social media campaign which starts today. So there's a whole bunch of hashtags here on the left-hand side of the screen. We'll talk about those in a second. First, we'll talk about this photo. So this photo is a picture of my elbow. Our elbow, it's like a play on words, I guess. You could figure that out. So there's a cup of coffee. And I was having this drink of coffee and I was thinking, I'm drinking from the Elbow watershed right now. And since most of our body is made up of water, it got me thinking, what is in my elbow? What is in my watershed? So this social media campaign is a little opportunity because everyone's elbow looks different. So if you go out into the field and take some pictures, you might want to try putting some of these hashtags in your social media. So for example, frame of mind, one of these groups you might use, frame of mind, your frame of mind, our frame of mind, our elbow, my elbow, your elbow, elbow river watershed, drinking water YYC, love my elbow, and so on. We'll have a few more slides that show the same hashtags, and I am recording this and I'll make it available. And then also you'll be able to email me at coordinator@erwp.org if you want to find out more. So let's look at a few more pictures. This image was on a bike ride, and it's framing a little creek that runs into the Elbow River. I believe this photo is of Ford Creek. Here's another perspective of what's in our elbow. Looking down here, this is close to where this creek flows into the Elbow River. This picture here is of my son in Nahahi Canyon. And one thing that we thought was interesting is the water, there's a little trickle of water. This is in July, coming down here. And then it looks like it disappears. There's no more water. But what's actually happening is that water is flowing under his feet, and then it comes up again to the surface before entering the Elbow River. Here's another day in the Elbow Watershed. We were meeting with some friends from the government of Alberta and from a trails group and from another nonprofit group called Cows and Fish. We were all getting together and looking at a map and trying to sort out some common ground in the watershed. What can we do on the landscape? I've made this little picture frame. So if you don't have a picture frame that you're willing to bring out into wherever you're going, or even at your house, you can email me at coordinator@erwp.org, and I will send you this picture frame as a PDF, and you can print it, and then you'll cut out the ERWP logo, and you might want to glue it backing on a piece of cardboard so that it's not too flimsy, and then you can use this and bring it out wherever you are in the Elbow Watershed. So here's a thought. We aren't the only species who live, work, and play in the Elbow Watershed. If these animals could take photos of their elbow, what would their pictures show? Okay, so that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat box, or you can send me an email afterwards. And again, I'll be recording this, and I'll send this to our friends at Friends of Fish Creek, and you can access it at any time. So happy photo taking.